Just 3 miles from the romantic, glittering canals of Venice lies an island that no tourist will ever see. You are not allowed to visit this place. The Italian government strictly forbids it. No ferries go there, no bridges connect to it, and if you try to pay a local fisherman to take you, they will flat out refuse, turn their boats around, and tell you to never ask about it again. And when you find out what is actually in the soil of this island, you will understand exactly why they are so terrified. Imagine a place where the ground you walk on is quite literally made from the remains of the dead. According to historians and researchers who have dared to test the dirt, nearly 50% of the soil on Poveglia Island is composed of human ash. This tiny, overgrown strip of land in the Venetian lagoon was the final, agonizing resting place for over 160,000 people. It is a monument to humanity's greatest panic, a dumping ground for the desperate, and a place where unimaginable horrors were committed under the guise of medicine. But the most disturbing part of Poveglia's story isn't just what happened during the Dark Ages. It's what happened centuries later, when the island was supposedly empty, that makes this place truly terrifying. To understand the nightmare, we have to go back to the year 1347. Europe was about to face an apocalypse unlike anything the world had ever seen. The bubonic plague, known as the Black Death, swept through the continent, wiping out over half the population. Venice, being one of the wealthiest and busiest trading ports on Earth, was a sitting duck. Ships arrived daily from the east, carrying silks, spices, and an invisible killer hiding in the fur of black rats. When the plague hit Venice, the sheer volume of death paralyzed the city. The canals, usually filled with merchant boats and gondolas, began to clog with rotting corpses. The stench of decay hung over the city like a thick fog. The government panicked. They realized that the dead were spreading the disease, but they also realized something far more horrifying. The dying were spreading it too. They needed a place to put them, a place far enough away that the disease couldn't reach the city, but close enough that the bodies could be transported quickly. They looked across the water and chose Poveglia. Almost overnight, this quiet little island was transformed into a lazaretto, a quarantine zone. But calling it a quarantine zone is a generous lie. It was a death camp. The decree from the Venetian rulers was absolute and merciless. If you showed even the slightest symptom of the plague, a cough, a fever, a strange mark on your skin, the plague doctors would come for you. These men, hiding their faces behind terrifying bird-like masks filled with sweet-smelling herbs to mask the stench of death, became the grim reapers of Venice. If they pointed their wooden canes at you, your life in the city was over. You were ripped from your home, dragged away from your screaming family, and thrown onto a boat bound for Poveglia. It didn't matter if you were a wealthy nobleman or a beggar on the street. On the boats to the island, everyone was equal. But here is the most chilling detail. Because the panic was so severe, the plague doctors didn't wait for a proper diagnosis. Thousands of people who simply had a common cold, a seasonal flu, or an allergic reaction were dragged onto those boats. Perfectly healthy people, terrified and begging for mercy, were dumped onto an island swarming with the deadliest disease in human history. They were essentially handed a death sentence for clearing their throats at the wrong time. But what awaited them on the shores of Poveglia was worse than the disease itself. When the boats arrived, the living were thrown into the same massive pits as the rotting dead. The island quickly ran out of space to bury the bodies. The pits were overflowing, so the authorities made a horrific decision. They started burning them. Massive pyres were built across the island, burning day and night for months on end. The fires burned so hot and for so long that the smoke could be seen from the balconies of Venice. The screaming of the dying mixed with the crackling of the flames. It's estimated that over 160,000 bodies were incinerated on this tiny plot of land. The ash fell like snow, coating the trees, the buildings, and the ground. Over the centuries, that ash settled, decomposed, and became the very earth of Poveglia. The island had become a literal graveyard of ash and bone. Eventually, the plague passed. The fires died out, and for centuries, Poveglia sat abandoned, a dark stain on the horizon that the people of Venice tried their hardest to forget. Fishermen refused to cast their nets near the island, claiming their catches would bring up human bones. The island was cursed, a place completely abandoned by God. But human memory is a fragile thing, and as the centuries rolled by, the brutal reality of Poveglia faded into ghost stories and local legends. People forgot why the island was truly forbidden, and that collective amnesia set the stage for a new kind of horror. Before we step into the twisted 20th century history of this island, if you find yourself drawn to the darker, forgotten chapters of human history, take a moment to subscribe to Hidden Epoch. It helps us continue unearthing the stories the world has tried to bury. Now, let's return to the ash-covered shores of Poveglia, because in 1922, the nightmare woke up again. The Italian government decided it was time to put the abandoned island to use. They erected a large, imposing brick building right on top of the mass graves. Officially, it was designated as a retirement home for the elderly, but that was just a cover. It didn't take long for the true nature of the facility to leak out. It wasn't a retirement home. It was an asylum for the mentally ill. The government was sending its unwanted, its troubled, and its forgotten citizens to an island made of human remains. And almost immediately, things started going wrong. The patients, already suffering from various mental illnesses, began to report terrifying experiences. They claimed they were being kept awake at night by the sounds of agonizing screams echoing from the soil. They said they saw shadowy figures burning in the dark, figures of people covered in horrific black boils, wandering the halls of the asylum. But because these people were labeled as insane, their desperate cries for help were completely ignored by the staff. The doctors simply increased their medication and locked them in their rooms. But there was one doctor who didn't just ignore them, he used them. This unnamed asylum director, whose true identity has been deliberately scrubbed from medical records, saw an opportunity. Far away from the prying eyes of the medical board in mainland Italy, he had a captive audience of patients who no one would ever believe, and who no one would ever come looking for. He believed he could cure their madness through extreme, experimental procedures. He began performing crude lobotomies on the patients, but he didn't use proper surgical equipment. According to the chilling reports that surfaced years later, he used hand drills, chisels, and hammers to bore into the skulls of fully conscious patients. He performed these agonizing procedures in the asylum's bell tower, the highest point on the island, so the screams would be carried away by the wind rather than echoing through the halls. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of patients were subjected to this torture. The doctor operated with complete impunity, a god ruling over an island of the damned. But what he didn't realize was that the island itself was slowly driving him mad. According to the legend, which is deeply rooted in the historical logs of the nurses who worked there, the doctor began to change. He grew paranoid, sleep-deprived, and manic. He started pacing the halls at night, claiming he could hear voices. Not the voices of his patients, but the voices of the plague victims, whispering to him from the walls, clawing at his mind from beneath the floorboards. The ghosts of Poveglia had finally found him. The climax of his madness occurred on a foggy night. Driven completely out of his mind by the relentless torment of the voices, the doctor climbed to the top of the very bell tower where he had tortured so many. The nurses claimed they heard him screaming in terror, begging for the voices to stop before a heavy thud echoed across the courtyard. The doctor had thrown himself from the tower, but the story doesn't end with his fall. A nurse who rushed to the scene claimed that he actually survived the drop, lying on the ground, writhing in agony. But as she approached to help him, she claimed a fine, grey mist emerged from the soil, enveloping his body and choking the life out of him. The island had claimed him. Shortly after his death, the asylum was permanently boarded up and shut down. The island was abandoned once more, returning to the silence of the lagoon. Over the decades, various attempts have been made to restore the island. In the 1960s, a wealthy family bought Poveglia, hoping to build a holiday home. They didn't even last a single night. They fled the island before sunrise, their daughter's face sliced open in an accident they refused to explain. And they never returned. Even recently, the Italian government tried to auction off a 99-year lease to anyone willing to redevelop the land. The auction failed. No amount of money could convince investors to build on dirt made of pulverized bone. Today, Poveglia sits quietly in the water, slowly being reclaimed by nature. The roof of the asylum has caved in, the vines have swallowed the bell tower, and the shores continue to slowly erode into the sea. Locals say that on quiet nights, if the wind is blowing just right, you can still hear the asylum bell ringing across the water. Even though the bell was removed decades ago, it remains a terrifying monument to our darkest impulses, a place where sickness, cruelty, and madness were quite literally baked into the earth. It is a stark reminder that some places are not meant to be conquered, rebuilt, or understood. Some places are meant to be left alone, forever serving as a warning of what